Even if it goes up by 150%, it'll be at around 1,000 trillion or a quadrillion in about 18 years. So, by that time, I think there's no escaping the political implications of the fact that you've basically eaten up the bond market. And really, I think the main course here and the grand prize is not so much the dollar as much as it is the bond market, because the bond market is what allows the dollar to be inflationary. It's what allows governments to continue to borrow. So
I guess my point here is why would you want to extrapolate out 20 years? Imagine a revolution in the world and then invite someone to assume you're correct and therefore faster and the world gets rational, and in the if capital flows out of sovereign debt, it'll flow out of other nations' sovereign debt first, which will strengthen the dollar, which may actually have the counter effect. So capital is going to flow out of all these things. If capital does flow, let's say capital flows out of bonds and the bond market collapses. Well, the yields are going to triple. And then there are a lot of people that are holding capital in value stocks are going to sell their value stocks and they're going to migrate into the bonds again. Right? And so you're going to have all sorts of trading for the next decade to 2 decades. And it's very difficult to know what'll happen. But, there's a pessimistic view, which is, well, I'm sure it's going to pretty much collapse the world and we're either going to get away with it or please stop us. Or there's another optimistic view, which is the world's going to get more rational. And as the world gets more rational, capital is going to be allocated more rationally and political systems are going to be rationalized. And as the world gets more rational, things will get better. And at some point, we will, if you believe in the political process, at some point people will spend less money or they will rationalize the tax in some way and there'll be some peaceful resolution to the thing. So be it. We still need companies, right? You still need companies. So at some point, Apple stock's going to be worth something. Even if it goes to $1, there'll be someone that'll think it's a good investment, right? So you need companies. You still need countries. Like maybe they'll reorient, right? Maybe Canada will break into French speaking and English speaking or not, right? But you still have political systems. Are bonds destined forever? There's still a place for bonds. It's just different bonds at different rate, right? If bond yields go up, then
it's the argument that I make in the fiat standard is that what's driving the bond market is not the credit worthiness of the borrower, but rather the demand for a store of value. The reason people are buying Greek bonds and Brazilian bonds and up until very recently Lebanese bonds is because where else are they going to put their money? They still don't know about Bitcoin, and they just think that there aren't any good ways where you don't get equity risk. But now, with the discovery of Bitcoin, it becomes a much more compelling place than lending to all these governments. So yields will go up, but then governments won't be able to service those yields. And so I think we'll likely witness the bond market shrink. And yeah, I think there's also kind of middle ground between my view and yours here, and which is that governments will just learn discipline. They'll be able to buy Bitcoin. They'll be able to save save themselves by buying Bitcoin, and they'll continue to be able to operate. But they won't. But they'll operate responsibly, and they'll have to shift towards. They'll get a big boost from their Bitcoin holdings going up, but it won't be. A system where they can continuously run eternal deficits. They'll get a boost that'll allow them to phase out their irresponsibility, hopefully, relatively bloodlessly and smoothly. But then, the big kind of high time preference party of the 20th century has to come to some kind of end, and the governments that manage to transition to some form of responsibility will obviously do much better than the ones that don't.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, great.
I mean, couldn't you say that at the end of the day, there'll be three classifications of political reaction? There'll be some governments that resist reality and they collapse. And maybe they collapse into civil war, or they just collapse into chaos. And there'll be some governments that fight, resist, struggle, and eventually reconfigure themselves after great deals of pain and agony. And there'll be some governments that look at the world and they transform themselves in an agile fashion, and maybe they don't get through without stress, but they morph into something different and accommodate the world. Right? What happens if a small country? The best example would be, what if a small country that still has a currency starts printing the currency to buy Bitcoin? The first one, right? There's a little bit of room, right? Like what? Right? Or Saudi Arabia. What if they were to go and just start buying Bitcoin with their currency? Like, how long in theory, couldn't you, if you ran a country like Emirates, couldn't you go ahead and buy billions, 2, 3, 5, 10 billion of this before anybody noticed? And it might never weaken your currency, right?
Yeah, they've got an enormous amount of excess capital.
Right?
Yeah, they're hosting World Cups that cost them a lot of money. They could be buying Bitcoin and watching the World Cup on TV. Like
a good model to consider is Norway and Sweden and other sovereign wealth funds, right? You've got regressive, you've got Cuba and Venezuela, right, and North Korea, and they're not really good at embracing property rights. And then you've got the middle-of-the-road conventional, and their central banks are holding, U.S. sovereign debt or gold, but mainly just sovereign debt. And then you've got progressive nations, and Norway is one. Norway's got a massive equity portfolio, right?